My name is Julie Pearson Little Thunder. Today is Friday, December 15th, 2017, and I'm interviewing Kent and Jeanette Young for the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. Kent, you're a University of Oklahoma graduate who worked for Citco as a public affairs manager, among other jobs. And Jeanette, you went to East Central Teachers College and worked in advertising for a while. You both played an important role in helping bring about the Doel Reed Center, OSU's teaching, research, and outreach extension located in Taos, New Mexico, which is the focus of our interview today. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
You're welcome.
Kent, where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Wewoka, Oklahoma, and probably have the distinction of being one of the few people that can claim that they were born over a pool hall. So rack 'em up has a special meaning for me. But I grew up in Wewoka also.
What did your folks do for a living?
Well, my dad had started out as a farmer, kind of a sharecropper, if you will, and we lived out on the farm from the time I was born until I was in the second grade, and we moved into town from there, and from there he started working for an uncle in a service station and spent most of his career working for as a jet engine mechanic at Tinkerfield in Oklahoma City, or in Del City. Brothers
or sisters?
I have 3 brothers and 1 sister. 2 of the brothers are deceased. 1 sister in Oklahoma City and another brother in New Hampshire.
What was Wewoka like when you were growing up?
Well, Wewoka was an oil boom town, and it was really a great place to grow up.
I agree.
You know, we could walk out the front door if we were going someplace and never bother to lock it. Everything was pretty much safe the entire time we were there. Wewoka has not fared too well. It's still the Seminole capital of the Indian Nation, so we've been around Native Americans all of our lives.
It's the capital of the Seminole Nation.
Capital of the Seminole Nation, that's correct. But it was just a great place to grow up, and we still stay in touch with some friends of ours who were classmates.
In fact, we had lunch with a number of them last Friday.
Right. We get together with them over in Oklahoma City about every other month for lunch, just to stay acquainted.
That's great.
So,
what's an important school experience you had early on that might have foreshadowed your interest in the oil and gas field or some of the directions that you took?
I'm not sure that there was anything in school that really pointed me in the direction of the oil industry. I did work for an uncle in a Texaco service station from the time I was in junior high until I graduated from high school. So I learned an awful lot from Uncle Cal. He was, just by watching the guy operate, how he worked, had a terrific work ethic, and that kind of instilled in me, I guess, some of those same qualities, I hope. And I was just very fortunate to get a job in the oil industry as an editor of a refinery newspaper with the old Sunray DX company when we first came to Tulsa in 1964.
So that's the journalism connection, because you attended University of Oklahoma, as I understand it. And
I did.
Majored in journalism.
Got a degree in journalism, public relations curriculum. I never went to school, J school, with the idea of being a reporter. I didn't want to do that. But
he was editor of the high school paper and editor of the yearbook.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I've always thought our English teacher was the one that really encouraged you.
No question about that. Her name was Lucy B. Sitton, and she would walk in to a class on the very first day and put her initials up there, which was LBS, and she said, if you guys pronounce that pounds you're out of here. So
She was a character.
She was a character.
Well, Jeanette, what about you? Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born here in Tulsa, but when I was 4, I think it was, we moved to Wewoka, and that's where I grew up and have fond memories.
What did your parents do for a living?
My dad he started out in the oil field, and then he went to work for Yeager Wholesale Company here in Tulsa. And he was a traveling salesman. And my mom was always a full-time wife and mother and involved in PTA and those kinds of things.
Do you have brothers or sisters?
I have one sibling. I have a brother, and he's 9 years younger than I am. And he lives here now.
What was Wewoka like for you growing up?
Well, like he said, it was a very friendly town. It was very football oriented. On Friday night, there was no one home. Everyone was at the ball game. It was a very spirited town, and it's sad now to go down there. It's just empty building after empty building and burned out buildings, and it's really sad. But I always laughed and said that there was no way any of us were going to do anything too bad, because by the time you got home, your folks had heard about it,
Right.
and we had the kind of parents that you were held accountable. So
Right.
I never had, like he was saying, our house was never locked. I never had a key. It was just never locked, and I always felt safe.
Right. What was your favorite subject in school?
Favorite subject? I would say English, and it was because of this teacher. She just really was. She had a way of making you want to do your very best, and she was tough.
Would you say she was your inspiration for going to teachers' college initially? Or?
No, he was.
Okay.
That's where
Well,
he went, and so.
Right. Okay. So I understand you two met in high school. How did you meet?
I probably ought to defer that question to Jeanette because she tells the story better than I do. So go ahead.
He was a senior and I was a freshman. And little town like that, you always knew the older kids. And so I was casually dating a friend of his. And we actually met for the first time on a double date. And he was with this other girl, and I was with his friend. The next week, Kent called and asked me out, and the other guy invited the other girl out, and we double dated that way. So we've always laughingly said, well, you have heard of the Wewoka switch. So,
That's cute. So, you went to school different directions. How did your relationship develop? How did you keep in touch?
We actually went to East Central together.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I went to East Central to work off required subjects before I transferred to OU.
Okay.
Kent was working his way through school.
And
Okay.
so I was working pretty much full-time the entire time we went. I did, anyway. And then Jeanette, later on, after we got married, she worked full-time also.
All right. Did you live, what are some of the places you were living in Norman for a while before
Yes.
coming to Tulsa?
The year that we got married, 1964, Kent transferred back to OU. And and he worked in a service station carrying a full load of classes, and I got a job in the dean's office at the College of Education, and so I was working full time. We lived in an apartment at first, and then there was an opening for college housing, and it was going to save us like $40 a month or something, and money was very, very tight. So we lived in the Quonset huts in Sooner City, those little plywood jobs that were temporary housing after World War II, and this was in 1962. And we lived there until he graduated.
Not super comfortable.
It was fine. We had no money, but none of our friends had money. And I found that I could rent a washing machine for less than I could do the laundry at the laundromat. And our utilities were covered. So, but the only place to put it in this Quonset hut was in the kitchen. And when that thing went on spin, the whole little hut just rocked.
Oh, that's a great story. So, tell us again, you end up in Tulsa because you have the job offer.
We decided if we were going to stay in Oklahoma, Tulsa is where we would want to be.
Okay.
And so, luckily, he found something. And
I only had about, I guess, maybe 3 interviews for job openings. One was with the Daily Ardmorite, a newspaper in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and they wanted a police reporter. After I got down and did the interview, I decided that doesn't sound very exciting to me. The other one was an opening that the Heidner Chamber of Commerce had for a director, and I really wasn't too enamored with that idea either, but then I found out about the opening at Sunray DX in the Public Relations Department, and they needed an editor for their refiner newspaper, which was produced for their 3 refineries employees, the one here in Tulsa, one in Duncan, Oklahoma, and one in Corpus Christi, Texas. So I got that job, luckily, and that job lasted about, I guess, maybe 2 years. Mm-hmm. Shortly after that, there was an opening in sales promotion in the marketing department, and I went over and did an interview with the head of the operation, a guy by the name of Herman Brummett, and Herman was one of those rah-rah Chamber of Commerce type guys, and you talk with him 5 minutes and he sold you on something. So that sounded like a lot of fun, and as it turned out, it was a great way to learn about negotiating business deals, putting together sales promotion programs where you would, for $4.99 and 10 gallons gasoline purchase, you got such and such, something. So that's the type of programs we wound up putting together, and it was a lot of fun.
Now, when you're just getting started out, you don't have a lot of money for art, of course.
We didn't have any.
And as I understand it, you really weren't particularly looking at art or going to museums right away in your early marriage. How did you become interested in art?
We found out about an art appreciation course at Philbrook Museum of Art here in Tulsa, and we signed up for it, and as it turns out, that was kind of the start of our interest in art, and we met a lot of people who had common interests, and so that pretty much was where we started, I guess. Jeanette had an art appreciation course in college at East Central, I believe, and so hers kind of started a little bit earlier than mine, but our art appreciation started developing, I think, more right at that point when we took that course.
Jeanette, what did you get out of that course specifically?
I think I got a B.
Oh, was it graded, the art appreciation course?
Oh, I'm talking about the...
You're talking about it in high school, but yeah.
I just kind of had my eyes opened to a lot of possibilities. Neither one of us had any art in high school, and our parents didn't have any interest in art, and it just, I don't know.
Do you remember your first purchase together of art?
I guess it would be that little painting upstairs with the reeds.
Actually, it was, there was an artist here in Tulsa who did prints, and I can't think of his name right off. We bought
Films?
No, we bought one of his prints, a small one. The Hula Station, we still have it upstairs.
Yes.
That, as far as I know, was probably one of the first pieces, and then there were several other pieces that we wound up buying from Mickey Creamer, a friend of ours who had an art gallery here in Tulsa. But it was only after we saw Mr. Reed's works and what he had done with the landscapes and with the female figure that we really started concentrating on black and white prints. And I think part of my interest from that stemmed from the fact that I used to do a lot of black and white photography.
Okay.
And so the black and white prints that he produced appealed to me. And after we began looking at his works and began buying some of his works, that's where our interest just kind of took off.
Right. And a lot of these were aquatints, right, that he was doing. Black and white isn't really generally appreciated. What drew you to that, Jeanette, and to Mr. Reed's work overall?
I think learning about the process, that it's done on a metal plate, everything has to be done backwards, and to me, that takes more talent than painting something. So I was just, I don't know, they just really intrigued me.
Right. Now, was you're buying pieces of his work occasionally through this gallery, which Mickey ran, located at 21st and Sheridan, I think he told me, the Creamer Gallery.
Yes.
Is Mr. Reed already in New Mexico at this point?
Yes.
Okay. So she's getting work shipped to her, and then she's calling you sometimes when pieces come in. How did you develop a friendship with the artist?
After we had purchased, well, the very first piece we bought of his was a cassine, which was a small cassine on board, about so big, and it's a landscape. And then later we bought, and I don't remember if it was through Mickey or if it was through Philbrook, an aquatint, which we still have upstairs. And in a conversation with Mickey Creamer one day, Jeanette asked if it would be possible if we could go out and meet Mr. Reed sometime. And this was in 1976
I think.
6 or 77, I'm not sure. But the painting that we had purchased was in Mickey's gallery. And we went out to Red River, New Mexico, which was the very first time we'd ever been to New Mexico, and took a day trip from Red River down to Taos just to see the place. And it was along that driving route down there that I remembered the landscape, just the massiveness of it and the openness of it and everything. And so when we got back to Tulsa, one of the first things that I wound up doing was going to Mickey's gallery and buying that little painting.
And you kind of mentioned just in informal conversation with me that painting had already kind of shaped what you were looking for in the landscape, in a way.
That's correct. Yes, we did. And the interest just grew from there. And when Jeanette asked Mickey one time if we could possibly meet him, and I'll let her tell the story from here on in, but Mickey arranged for us to do that the next time we went to Taos, New Mexico. He didn't actually live in Taos, he lived in Talpa. But he had a post office box in Taos, and they liked the name Taos better because it was the artist community.
Right.
Talpa didn't have that name, but they just barely lived in Taos. In Talpa. When you go down Highway 518 out of Taos down south and go down through there, when you come to the Talpa sign, turn right, and that's their place. It's just being right there. So anyway, I'll let Jeanette tell the story about how we met him for the first time.
And before you do, Jeanette, let me ask you too quickly, what were your first impressions of New Mexico? Because it's so different from Tulsa and Wewoka.
Yes, very, very different. I just was interested and fascinated with all the adobe buildings and everything. And Mr. Reed was a wonderful, wonderful storyteller, and he knew everyone, and he could tell you the history behind it. He just brought it to life. And had it not been for him, I probably wouldn't have been nearly as interested in it.
So when you make that trip, what happens?
Mickey asked him if we would, told him that we were coming out and we would like to meet him. And he said, sure. He said, have him call me when they get to town. So we got out there and Kent called him and he invited us out to the studio. And so he told us how to get there. Well, we drove and drove and drove, and Kent said, I must have made a wrong turn. He said, it can't be this far. And I said, well, there was this man standing out by the mailbox a ways back. You don't think that was him, do you? And so we turned around, and sure enough, here this internationally known artist is standing out by the mailbox waiting for these Okies that he had never laid eyes on. And we wound up spending the afternoon with him, and the next evening we met them for dinner, and we had dinner, and that's when we met his wife and daughter Martha. And from then on, it just, I don't know, it was just a friendship. His birthday was in May, and he would always have a celebration. And he would call and say, you are coming out now, aren't you? And his parties were just wonderful. He'd have them at a hotel or something, and all these other artists and people from the Pueblo, and the governor of the Pueblo would be there, and it was just really interesting.
Oh, how fun. Yes. So you're getting exposed not just to him as an artist and his work, but
yes,
you're meeting all these other people and getting exposed to the Pueblo culture.
It was really fascinating, the people that he would have there, and Jeanette and I would kind of look at each other and shake our heads sometimes and wonder,
how did we get
involved in this?
And Martha would have some of her friends. In fact, one year, one of the editors of Vogue magazine was there, and it was just a real interesting mixture.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about Martha, because she was she was artistic in her own right.
Oh,
she
definitely.
Did some clothing design, as I understand.
Right. She had had a shop called Martha's of Taos, and she hired the ladies at the Pueblo to sew the clothing for. This Lucy that we were talking about early, she was kind of Martha's head lady, I guess.
Well, Martha, I think she was one of the really early promoters of broom skirts. Is that right? Maybe
I think you're right.
I think that, well, there have been broomstick skirts done before, and in fact I think one of the things that brought her into that was the fact, I believe I'm correct, that her father, Doel, had bought one of those things for her for a present.
Okay.
And that's what started the wheels turning as far as Martha was concerned.
Right.
And she was working for another store out there, but began designing the clothes, if I remember correctly, and having them made for that particular store, and then branched out later on to open her own shop. And so buying her cloth from J.C. Penney's, which used to be right there on the corner there in the town of Taos, at the corner of what Mr. Reed used to refer to as the corner of don't walk and don't walk, because that's what the stoplight said periodically.
And you mentioned that she employed how many Pueblo women?
Lucy Archuleta was one of the ladies from the Pueblo, and she was kind of Martha's go-to person for all kinds of things, not only at home, but at the shop. And it was the ladies at the Pueblo who actually sewed the dresses, or produced the skirts, and the velvet tops with the silver buttons, those kinds of things for Martha's shop. And at any given time, Martha would employ probably anywhere from a dozen to 15 of the women from the Pueblo. And so it was quite an impact for
Yes.
For a place like the Pueblo.
Right. Do you have a couple of her things, Jeanette?
I couldn't afford them. I have one blouse.
Wow.
I'll be happy to show it to you. But there is a lady here in Tulsa that has a number of her beautiful, beautiful things.
So they were quite expensive,
Yes.
even in the early days. And so you continue buying Doel Reed's work, and we're gonna be able to look at a couple of pieces at the end here. It's just beautiful, beautiful work. You're going to his birthday parties when you can. You're keeping in touch with him. It must have been it must have been hard on you when he passed too. It must have.
It was.
Well, I remember that we were out in was it Breckenridge? I think it was Breckenridge, with Mickey and Stu Creamer, these friends, when Mickey got a telephone call that he had passed away. And they wound up going down to the service in Taos, and we had to come back because I had to go with our president to a major presentation that he was giving up in New York. So I didn't have a choice. I had to do it, and did not get to go to his service. So sorry I didn't, but things happen.
Right. Well, and you know, then that's the other friendship that you have is with Mickey and her husband.
Right.
And that's kind of unusual, I think, between collectors and a dealer. I mean, it's not unusual to have a friendship, but really to spend time with somebody. What kinds of insights did she and her husband sort of help you with in terms of art over the years?
They were just a fun couple to be with. Stuart was an art director for an advertising agency here in Tulsa, and Mickey had always either dealt in art or had a gallery of their own. And I think that she wound up giving lectures on art at various places, things like that. And they were exactly 20 years older than Jeanette and me. They were liberal Democrats, and we both are conservative Republicans, and you wonder how that relationship
The only
and
thing we
friendship.
had in common was love of art.
Art.
Right.
Love of art.
I mean,
But
otherwise,
we got
we were just
along,
opposite.
and as a matter of fact, we still stay in touch with their daughter-in-law who lives here in Tulsa, and their son who lives in Seattle now.
That's neat. So Martha, as I understand, was she's an only child, but she wanted her legacy to go to OSU. Did she have a connection to OSU herself, Martha?
She was a graduate.
Okay,
yeah,
that's what I thought I
and-
read.
And her father, of course, established the art department
Right,
there in 1925. So,
Right, and that's important to, reemphasize that when he came here, he specialized in printmaking, and there weren't a lot of printmakers out there. So I think OSU it was the A&M at that point
right.
was really happy to have him as an instructor, as a professor. Well, tell me a little bit about the first conversation you had then with Martha regarding the Doel Reed property in 2005.
After Doel passed away and Jane passed away, we stayed in touch with Martha and would still go out and visit with her maybe once a year or so, but at least stayed in touch with her by telephone. And I called her in October of 2005 and asked her, after the pleasantries and all of that, asked her what she was going to do with her property. It consisted of 2 old adobe homes, one of which Doel and Jane used. Martha had the other one. And the third structure was his art studio, which originally was a goat shed that he converted into an art studio. And her comment was that, well, it's going to the Cincinnati Art Institute where my parents got their art degrees, but I'd really rather have it go to OSU and have OSU use it as a teaching facility as a tribute to my father. And so in a weak moment I said, well, I'll see if I can help you get that done.
That's quite a project.
So after that conversation, I got on the telephone and started making telephone calls, because I didn't have any connections with OSU at all, except for the fact that our daughter went to school there.
Okay.
And she graduated from OSU with a marketing degree. But other than that, I didn't know anyone. And the person who helped me start the connections was a professor who was here in Tulsa, had moved from Stillwater to Tulsa, and she and I were both on the Nature Conservancy board. And so I called her and said, how do I get in touch with somebody at OSU? And I told her a little bit about the project, and she said, well, I'll suggest that you contact a lady in Pennsylvania who was formerly with the OSU Foundation. And she gave me her number, and I called her, and her recommendation was that I get in touch with the chairman of the OSU Foundation, and that chairman turned out to be Melinda Berry Fisher, a very astute businesswoman in Stillwater who owns it and runs and is president of an oil company that her father established. And that was right around Thanksgiving time, I think. And I called Melinda one night, one evening, told her what Martha wanted done, and she kind of remembered who Doel Reed was, but didn't really know all that much about him at that point. And so at the end of the conversation, she said, I think we might be interested in the property, but it's going to take some time for us to figure out whether or not we can use it, how we would use it, and that kind of thing. But she said, I will be back in touch. And so it was probably a few weeks later that she called back and said, yes, we are interested. She had talked with the attorney for the OSU Foundation and a number of other people, the dean, and ultimately they said, yes, we want to take a look at it. And so in the following February, I think February or March, Martha was going to have a high school reunion in Stillwater. And we had stayed in touch on this thing, and she said, I'd really like to come out and go to the reunion. And I said, well, that would be an excellent time for you to talk with the OSU people about your thoughts on the property and everything. And if you want me to, I'll set that up. So she came back and stayed with us a couple of nights. We took her over to Stillwater, and I had put together a meeting with Melinda Berry Fisher, the head of the art department at OSU, Gary Clark, the attorney for the OSU Foundation, and 2 or 3 other people. I can't remember exactly who else. But anyway, we met in one of the foundation conference rooms over there, and Martha made a verbal commitment to them at that point. So that's how that wound up starting. It took an awful lot of work and time to put the thing together because her will called for it to go to the Cincinnati Art Institute.
Oh, so that was already in the will.
That was in her will.
Oh, I see.
And that was in her father's will. And the ironic thing about it was Doel told me one time when we were talking out in his studio that he had called someone at OSU and made an inquiry about this very thing, and nobody got back to him. They didn't bother. So. And
part of the challenge, maybe psychologically, I guess, it was just the fact it was so far away. This is a far-flung property for a university.
Well, the lucky thing about that was that Dean Sherwood, who was behind us on this project all the way, and several of us were out at Martha's visiting with her, and this was before Burns Hargis became president. Burns and Ann had been out to Taos in that area out there, had rented houses out there, so they knew the area very well and just loved it. So Dean Sherwood or someone invited him to come out to the property. And as Dean Sherwood and I were standing out in Doel's studio explaining what we were thinking about as far as Martha's gift, and at the end of our explanation, Burns turned to both of us and said, I like what you're doing. There's only one thing with the project. And we kind of looked at each other and thought, what next? And he said, you're not thinking big enough. So we knew we had him.
And that was before it was
That was before he ever became president.
Right.
So, I think he knew.
Oh, I think he probably did too.
Yeah. It wasn't.
But we knew at that point that he was behind the project.
Right.
So
and that made a world of difference.
It did.
Oh, I'm sure. Were there any snafus?
A couple. There was an attorney from Norman who is a good friend of David Boren's. Doel had done, I think, a show or two at OU. And this guy had been in touch with Martha, as a matter of fact, had done a little bit of pro bono legal work for her on an issue that she had with an art gallery down in Santa Fe. And he tried his best to talk Martha into selling the property to OU. And I still have a letter upstairs that proves that. And I remember in a conversation that he called me one time and tried to get me to come on board with him and try to get Martha to donate the property to OU. And I never will forget, his comment was, and I can't even think of this guy's name right now, and it doesn't matter, but one of the things he said to me was, I would really like for us to get this property for OU and we'll just rub OSU's nose in it. And at that point, I thought, you jerk, you know.
Even though you're an OU graduate, you do have the, yeah.
Burns Hargis loves to give him a hard time about that. And
You have the daughter who went to OSU, and
Right.
we're trying
But,
to.
you know, to me, the property
That was really Martha's
just
wish.
rightly belonged to OSU
Right.
if it was going anywhere.
Because her father had taught here.
Right.
And another thing, several of her friends in Taos really tried to talk her into selling it
Right.
and not
Mm-hmm.
giving it to OSU.
Sure, sure.
And the sad part about that would have been, had she done that, she would not have gotten anywhere near what she thought the property would be worth in order to do that. I mean,
Right.
the property just required, as we found out later, an extensive amount of work to refurbish the buildings. I mean, it was a lot of work.
Well, part of the arrangement I read was that she would continue to live in the home and she'd receive a stipend until she passed in 2011. Did you end up having to travel out there pretty frequently during this process?
We went out a number of times. I wound up serving as her personal representative of her estate at her request. And that helped us facilitate the transfer of the property once she passed away to OSU. There were just untold hours of time spent taking care of the estate, paying off debtors, or debts rather, and working with her attorney, Cliff Johnson, who had been Doel's attorney also. So he knew, you know, the property and the Reeds and, you know, what all was involved from the very beginning. So it was very, very easy for him to help us with that. The only thing is that you wanted to get these things done and done and done, and they operate on Taos time.
Right.
It was very frustrating.
You know, you request something and you might get an answer 2 weeks from now. So
Another
There
thing,
were-
there was a lot of hand-holding.
there was. And later in Martha's years, when she became ill, there was a lot of dealing with people who had to help her because the doctors had told her that there was no way that she could even be alone 24 hours. I mean, she had to have 24-hour care,
Wow.
or at least attendance. So some of those people would go to Martha. She was a very generous person. Go to Martha and ask her for an advance against their payment that was coming up at the end of the week. Well, Martha would give it to them on Tuesday, forget that she did that on Friday, and pay them a full amount. So, and they just took advantage of her. that way.
Right.
Also, Kent would get a call at night. Mr. Young, the night nurse, hasn't shown up.
Oh my goodness.
What's he going to do in Tulsa? You know, it was.
Yes, I couldn't see that would be
Yeah, that went on probably for the better part of a year or
very
more,
hard.
maybe. So,
and stressful. Well, as you mentioned, the property consists of her home, then Doel and his wife's home, and then the studio, and all three places were renovated. Were you involved in that at all? That process?
I was not really involved in that. The person who really handled all of that was our second director of the Doel Reed Center. And I have to give him an awful lot of credit for getting those renovations done. He went in there and we found out that there were all kinds of other issues that we didn't know about when they started working on Martha's home. And Martha had 9 cats, I think, when she passed away. She'd always been a cat lover. And the cats, of course, went to the bathroom, wherever. The thinking was that they're going to be able to go in there and refurnish these old hardwood floors that were in the inner home. Didn't work. They had to tear all of that out. They had to excavate all the dirt underneath the house and bring in fresh dirt.
Wow.
It was that bad.
Yeah.
And just all kinds of little things like that just kept popping up. The septic tanks, for example, and the lateral lines that run to the septic tanks, we found out those were collapsed. So that had to be all redone. And it was just those kinds of things that kept happening over and over.
Right.
To the point that one time when I think it was either Martha's home or Doel's home or the studio one, I'm not sure which, we had a dedication ceremony out there, and he made the comment, he said, if anybody ever tries to give you an old adobe home, turn around and run. So,
there's a lot more to renovating them than meets the eye.
Right.
Well, one of the reasons for establishing the center was to give OSU students the opportunity to experience the cultures of New Mexico, Native and Hispanic, as well on the site. Why is this important?
All of the students, it was not very long after Martha made the commitment to OSU that the head of the art department, Sally McCorkle, began taking students out during the summer for 1 to 2 week courses. And the courses would consist of working with museums in Taos on exhibitions that they were conducting, doing interviews with Martha on videotape. And so invariably when those students got through with those courses in the summertime, they just raved about it. It was so different from the classroom experience that they have back in Stillwater, Oklahoma, or just being in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Right.
And that began to expand, and to the point where now they are conducting courses out in Taos, New Mexico for not only students, but we've had visiting artists who've gone out and they've worked alongside the students to produce artworks of various kinds.
Because especially the printing equipment, I guess. That
right, separate from his printing press and everything, although there have been students from OSU that have gone out there and they've actually used his press to produce prints. And it had expanded now to a point where there are adult courses being offered, non-credit courses on all kinds of things. There was one course that was taught 2 summers in a row, I think, on the atomic bomb, for example. And with a day trip down to Los Alamos to tour those facilities down there where the first atomic bomb was produced. And one of the committee members that we have is a potter, Diane from Taos. Her significant other is a professional fly fisherman, so he teaches a fly fishing course.
Oh, that would be a fun one to take.
But Martha wanted the property and the facilities out there used for teaching facilities, and so that's exactly what's happening now.
Right.
Students now are going out for writing courses and using Martha's home. It can accommodate up to about 15 students at one time, at any given time, to teach, a course on something. So it's being used just the way Martha wanted it to. In fact, a lot more, I think, than we ever expected when we were first talking about this thing back in 2005. The other interesting thing about it, it's not just for artists or writers. It's a multidiscipline course, or facility rather, that's available, because you can think about geology, botanical students, architectural students, geology, all kinds of things, history. So it's widely available for use on all kinds of things.
Right, that's an impressive variety of classes that they're teaching. You haven't taken one of the non-credit classes.
We have not. We've normally had, unfortunately, something else going on in July when they teach those things.
What's your favorite spot then at the Doel Reed Center? Both of you, I guess, separately, when you get a
Well, I don't know.
chance to think.
Favorite spot. We have lots of memories of being there and visiting with them. And one year we had Thanksgiving out there. That was after
This was after Doel died, right?
But I made a turkey and we took all of the stuff out and we had Thanksgiving at their home. And the first time that we went out, we spent the afternoon in the studio with him, and that was a happy memory. And we spent a lot of time at Martha's house. She loved to have parties, and she would have what she called a Sunday afternoon soiree with hooch. And so her friends would come out and they would sit out on the porch and have cocktails and talk. And so
And look out over the Truchas Mountains. Martha was character. She really was a diva, and there was one time when we went out there to be with her. One of the art galleries in Taos was having a show. It was not about Martha or any of her dad's works or anything else, but Martha was going to be the featured person at this show, celebrity, if you will. Jeanette and I went out to pick her up at her home, and let's say the thing was going to start at 6:30 or something like this. And so we went out about 5 o'clock to pick her up. She was at Walmart shopping. So we sat there and waited on Martha until she finally got home. When she did get home, she didn't have her hair done. She didn't have any makeup on. She had to change clothes. And if you knew Martha, I mean, you were in for an hour at least just for that to happen. So we waited and we waited and we waited, and Martha finally was ready. And we went downtown. By this time it was probably 7:15 or something like this, and we were supposed to have been there at 6:30. Pulled up in front of the art gallery, and I went around to open the door for her and to help her out because there was a curb there. And all these people started pouring out of the art gallery with their cameras, and they were shooting photographs.
it was like,
It was
like what you see on television or something.
Right.
A premiere, and and
Right, a premiere.
flashes were
And
going
there you
on.
were too, both of you.
So anyway, and I don't think there'd been anybody that would argue with that diva label.
Right. Well, you and Jeanette both are involved with a number of civic organizations, and I guess you belong to an antique club and you do a lot of gardening.
I'm in a garden club.
You're in a garden club?
Mhm.
Okay.
It's a home and garden club, and once in a while we talk about gardening.
Okay.
It's really just a social thing.
Well, I was wondering if Southwestern culture has influenced you in some of your interests in gardening. I mean, certainly
No.
it's showed up in your art, but okay. And you are a member of the Oklahoma chapter of the Nature Conservancy, I guess.
I served a couple of terms on the board, and and you have to rotate off after, it's either 2 or 3 terms. I don't remember which it was. And so I had to rotate off, and you can stay off for a year and come back on board if you want, but I just haven't done that. So.
Right.
But I still have an interest.
But what got you interested in that?
One of my jobs at Citgo as public affairs manager was to take care of the contributions for the company. And we were approached by a printing company. I guess it was a publishing company here in Tulsa about a book that was done for the Conservancy on the Tallgrass Prairie. And they needed some funding to finish the printing, finish the project. And so I talked with our executives about it, and they agreed that we should go ahead and provide that funding. The Conservancy, shortly after that, asked me if we could help them find someone to serve on the board as a result of that. And so I tried to get some of our executives to do that, and none of them showed any interest whatsoever. So I thought, well, I'll do it. And so I went on the board. And it is learned that it's just a terrific organization. And as a matter of fact, I belong to another club here in Tulsa called the Tulsa Men's Club. And the only reason for its existence is to have fun. It's a social outfit. We have dances, dinner dances at Southern Hills, once in a while. But we also put together day trips out someplace. And here about a month ago, a couple of us put together a day trip up to the Tallgrass Prairie to the Bison Roundup. And so we did that for a day. Turned out to be just a real success. The people that, you got 56 seats on a bus. Once you fill the bus, you can't do any more. And so we had a lot of people that, after that was over with, said, man, we tried to get on that and just didn't make it.
Oh.
So, well, sorry.
Yeah, I bet that was really memorable. Well, is there anything else we should talk about before we wind this up? And I think we'll close by looking at a couple of Doel Reed's works, too. I think I can get a shot of them in the bedroom there.
Okay. Well, Doel, he was just a terrific individual, very gentle, and I don't think I ever heard him say a bad word about anybody. He was just a very, very kind individual. And we used to go out to Taos and would get checked into a motel, whatever, and get settled in, and then go down to Martha's shop, which was right next door to the old historic Taos Inn, right there on the main highway through Taos. And lo and behold, we'd go back in the back of Martha's shop, and Doel would be back there making boxes for Martha's clothes.
Oh.
Instead of at home painting, and doing some of his wonderful art pieces.
Helping his daughter.
Yes. And Mrs. Reed, as a matter of fact, served as the accountant for Martha, if you will.
It was a very interesting triangle between the mother and the father and Martha.
Because and I understood the mother was sort of an artist herself.
Yes,
so.
She was,
yeah. And she was very quick to point out that she gave up her
career
for him.
I see.
A funny story about her, she was a tiny little thing, and they had a one-man show in Santa Fe for Mr. Reed, and so we went, and they were getting up in years, and he was losing his eyesight, and she was having a little difficulty walking. So anyway, we were going, and it was several galleries, and we were going through, and she was holding my arm, and we went into this one room, this one gallery, and it was all nudes. He was known for his nudes. And she stood there and she looked around. And after a while she said, "Ah, yes, this was when Doel was in his Holstein period."
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that story. All right, well, we'll pause for a minute and take a look at a couple of works that you have by Mr. Reed. Okay, can you tell us about these pieces by Mr. Reed?
Well, they're two distinctly different prints here. One is a landscape. The other one is one of Mr. Reed's famous figures with the landscape. The title of this one is called Spring. And to me, the fascinating thing about the prints is the fact that you have everything from almost pure whites in a print to just velvety blacks. And as I commented earlier, I had done some black and white photography when I first started my career, and was editing a newspaper, and I think that's one of the things that appealed to me most about what he's done with these prints. The other interesting thing to me is that his pieces were collected throughout the United States, major museums, as well as two major museums, one in Paris called Bibliothèque Nationale. They have one of his prints in the collection. And Victoria and Albert in London also has one of his pieces. And interestingly, at one point after Mr. Reed passed away, Martha and Jane Reed, Doel's widow, went to London and were fortunate enough to get the museum to bring the print out so that they could see it. And that was a thrill for them.
And how about this piece?
That has always been one of my favorite pieces, and Doel was known quite well for his figures with landscapes, and some of them nude, some not. Interesting story about one of the models that Doel had used out in Taos, New Mexico, at one of his celebrations. We were, I think it was at the Sagebrush Inn where he held this one, celebration of his birthday. And this waitress came up and said to Mr. Reed, "Mr. Reed, I suspect you probably don't remember who I am, do you?" As it turns out, she was one of his models for one of his nude drawings.
Thank you. That's a great story. Well, thank you both for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome.